The gun was still in Dante Marchetti's hand when he heard the piano. He froze at the top of the staircase, his boots silent on the marble floor, his breath caught somewhere between his throat and his chest. The sound came from the West Wing, from the room that had been locked for 6 years. From the room no one, not his guards, not his housekeeper, not even his own blood, was allowed to enter. Someone was playing his mother's piano. He moved fast, faster than a man his size should have been able to move, down the long hallway with its cold portraits and colder silence. The door to the music room stood open, just a crack, and golden light spilled out onto the dark floor, like something had bled through the wood. He pushed the door wide with the flat of his hand. A young woman sat at the piano, her fingers moving across the keys with a gentleness that did not belong in this house. She wore the plain gray uniform of the household staff, her dark hair pulled back, her eyes closed, as though she were somewhere far away from the danger she did not know she was in. The melody she played was slow and aching, full of longing, the kind of song that made a grown man remember things he had spent years trying to forget. Dante knew that song. He had heard it exactly once before, when he was a boy of 8, sitting under this same piano, while his mother played it and hummed under her breath. She had never written it down. She had never played it for anyone else, not for guests, not for his father, not even for the priest who used to visit on Sundays. She told him once that it was a secret between the two of them, a song that belonged only to their family. His mother had been dead for 6 years. "Stop," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. The woman's eyes snapped open, and her hands froze above the keys. She turned to look at him, and for a moment, there was no fear in her face at all, only confusion, as if she had woken from a dream she could not quite remember. Then she saw the gun still hanging loose in his hand, and her whole body went rigid. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, standing so fast the piano bench scraped against the floor. "I didn't mean to. The door was open, and I just heard music in my head, and my hands moved before I could stop them. I didn't touch anything else, I swear. Please don't." "Who told you to come in here?" Dante's voice was low and even, the voice he used when he wanted someone to understand that he was not asking twice. "No one. I didn't know this room was. I'm new. I started 3 days ago. Mrs. Calder hired me to help with the East Wing and the kitchens. I got lost looking for the linen closet, and I heard the piano was here and the piano was not making a sound before you touched it." He stepped further into the room, and she stepped back until her legs hit the piano bench, and she could go no further. "No one plays this instrument. It has not been tuned in 6 years. It should not even hold a note." "I don't understand what you mean," she said, and her confusion looked real, which unsettled him more than if she had lied. "What is your name?" "Elena." "Elena Wren." He studied her face for a long moment, searching for a flicker of deceit, a tell, anything that would explain what he had just witnessed. He found nothing but a frightened young woman standing very still in a room that was supposed to be sealed to the world. "Play it again," he said. Her eyebrows drew together. "What?" "The song. Play it again." I'm not sure I can. I don't even know what it was. My hands just moved. I've never had a piano lesson in my life." "Then how did you play a song that exists nowhere? Not in any book, not on any recording. A song that only my mother knew, and she has been dead for 6 years. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, a crack he hated himself for the moment it happened. Elena's face went pale. She looked down at her own hands as though they belonged to someone else. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know how I knew that song. I've never heard it before in my life. I promise you, I have never heard it before." Dante set the gun down on the edge of a side table, a gesture that seemed to cost him something, and crossed the room until he stood only a few feet from her. Up close he could see she was younger than he first thought, maybe 23 or 24, with a small scar above her left eyebrow, and eyes the color of strong tea. There was something familiar in the shape of her face that he could not place, something that tugged at a memory just out of reach. "Sit down," he said. "Sir, I really should go back to my duties. Mrs. Calder will be looking for me, and I don't want to cause any—" "Sit down, Elena." She sat. He remained standing, arms crossed, studying her the way he studied men across a negotiating table, looking for the seam where the truth would show itself. "Tell me about your family," he said. "Where you grew up. Who raised you?" "I grew up outside the city, in a small house with my grandmother. My parents died when I was very young, in an accident. I don't remember them at all. My grandmother raised me until I was 17, then she passed too, and I've been on my own since." Her voice wavered slightly on the word grandmother, and Dante noticed it the way he noticed everything, filing it away. "Did your grandmother play piano?" "No, she could barely afford the roof over our heads, let alone an instrument like that." Elena glanced toward the piano, its dark wood gleaming even in the dim light, and something crossed her face that looked almost like grief, though she had no reason to grieve an object she had never seen before 3 minutes ago. "I don't know why I'm not more frightened right now." "I should be. You're clearly someone important, and I clearly did something I wasn't supposed to do. But all I can think about is that song. It's still in my head. I can hear it even now." "That makes 2 of us," Dante said quietly. He turned away from her and walked to the window, looking out over the dark gardens his mother had once tended with her own hands, roses that had grown wild and unruly since no one cared for them the way she had. He thought of the men waiting for him downstairs, the deal that had gone sideways only an hour ago, the reason he had come home with a weapon still in his grip, instead of locked away where it belonged. All of that felt distant now, pushed aside by 5 minutes in a room he had avoided for 6 years. "You will tell no one what happened in this room," he said without turning around. "Not Mrs. Calder, not the other staff. If anyone asks why you were up here, you got lost, you found an unlocked door, and you left immediately without touching anything. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir. And you will not come back to this room again. Not to clean it, not to dust it, not for any reason at all, unless I bring you here myself." Elena rose from the bench slowly, smoothing down the front of her uniform with hands that still trembled faintly. "I truly am sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to disturb anything of yours. I know how it must look, a stranger walking into a room and touching things that clearly meant something to you. If it helps at all, whatever that song was, it felt like something beautiful, not something to be afraid of." Dante turned to face her, and for the first time since she had opened her eyes and seen him standing in the doorway with a gun in his hand, he let his expression soften, just slightly, just enough that she might have imagined it. "It was beautiful," he said. "My mother wrote it. She used to play it for me when I couldn't sleep, when I was small enough to still fit under this piano while she played. She died before she ever taught it to anyone else. She died before she ever wrote it down." He paused, and the silence between them stretched thin and taut. "So you understand why I need to know how a stranger who has worked in this house for 3 days can sit at an instrument that has not made a single sound in 6 years, and play a song that exists nowhere in this world, except inside my own memory." Elena's lips parted, but no words came. She looked as lost as he felt, maybe more lost, because at least he understood what had been taken from him. She did not even understand what she had been given. "I don't have an answer for you," she finally said. "I wish I did. I know that's not what you want to hear." "No," Dante agreed. "It is not." He walked past her to the piano, and let his fingers hover just above the keys without pressing down, the way he had not done in 6 years, not since the night he locked this room and told himself he would never open that door again. The wood was cool under his fingertips. The silence in the room felt enormous. "Leave," he said quietly. "Before Mrs. Calder starts asking questions, neither of us wants to answer." Elena hesitated at the door, glancing back at him once, at the way he stood over the piano, like a man standing over a grave. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I think whoever wrote that song loved you very much." Then she was gone, her footsteps fading down the hallway, and Dante Marchetti stood alone in a room full of ghosts, staring down at a piano that should not have made a sound, thinking about a woman he had known for less than 10 minutes, who somehow carried a piece of his mother inside her, without knowing how it got there. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his study with a glass of untouched whiskey in front of him, running the events of the evening through his mind again and again, searching for a rational explanation, and finding none. Elena Wren was either the most convincing liar he had ever encountered in a life built on lies, or she was telling the truth, and the truth was far stranger than any lie could ever be. Neither possibility let him rest. By morning, he had made a decision. He would find out everything there was to know about the young woman who had wandered into his mother's music room, her records, her past, every detail of the 17 years before her grandmother died, and the years after, when she claimed to have been entirely alone in the world. If she was a threat, a plant sent by one of his rivals to gather information under the cover of an innocent face, he would deal with her the way he dealt with every threat that walked through his door. But if she was telling the truth, if there was no explanation at all beyond the impossible, then he had a different problem entirely. One that had nothing to do with rivals or business, or the dangerous world he ruled from the top floor of this house. One that had everything to do with his mother, and the secret she had apparently left behind, hidden inside a stranger who did not even know she was carrying it. Downstairs, in the servants' quarters, Elena Wren lay awake in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the melody in her mind over and over, note by note, though she could not have written a single one of them down if her life depended on it. She thought of the man's face when he first heard her playing, the raw shock in his eyes before the anger came, the way his voice had broken just slightly on the word died. She thought of the strange, sudden certainty she had felt the moment she sat at that piano, as if her body remembered something her mind never had. A warmth in her chest, a woman's voice, humming low, somewhere just behind her memory, close enough to touch and impossible to reach. She did not understand it, but she knew, with a certainty that frightened her more than the gun in Dante Marchetti's hand ever could, that this was only the beginning. 3 weeks passed, and Dante Marchetti watched Elena Wren the way a hunter watches a deer that has wandered too close to the house, uncertain whether to trust the calm or brace for the moment it bolts. He had men look into her past within a day of the incident in the music room. What they found was thin, almost frustratingly ordinary. A birth certificate from a small town 2 hours outside the city. School records that stopped at 17, the year her grandmother died. No siblings, no living relatives that anyone could locate. A gap of nearly a year after her grandmother's death where there was almost no trace of her at all, as though she had simply vanished from the world and reappeared, working odd jobs in cafes and cleaning services before landing, 3 months ago, at the employment agency that had placed her in his house. It was the gap that bothered him most, not because it proved anything, but because it proved nothing, and nothing was worse than a lie. A lie could be unraveled, silence could not. He kept his distance from her at first, watching from across rooms, listening to the way she spoke with the other staff, the way she laughed softly at something Mrs. Calder said in the kitchen, the way she seemed, in every visible respect, like an ordinary young woman, with no secrets darker than a difficult childhood. But he had learned long ago that the most dangerous people were the ones who looked the least dangerous, and so he watched, and he waited, and he told himself that whatever had happened in that music room had a rational explanation he simply had not found yet. Elena, for her part, tried to forget the entire evening had happened. It did not work. The melody stayed with her, humming beneath her thoughts at strange hours, when she was folding linens or scrubbing a countertop, or lying awake at 2 in the morning, staring at the same water stain on the ceiling she had memorized within her first week in the house. Sometimes she caught herself tapping the rhythm against her leg without meaning to. Once, she woke from a dream she could not remember, except for the clear and certain knowledge that a woman had been humming to her, close, so close she could almost feel breath against her hair, and when she reached for the memory, it slipped away like water through her fingers. She told herself it meant nothing. She had always had a strange mind, prone to vivid dreams and sudden feelings she could not explain, a trait her grandmother used to call her wandering spirit, with a fondness that made the strangeness feel less frightening. But this was different. This felt like something had reached into her and left a mark, and she did not know what to do with a mark she could not see. She saw Dante Marchetti often in the weeks that followed, though they rarely spoke. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair combed back, and eyes the color of a storm about to break. The other staff spoke of him in careful, lowered voices, the way people speak of weather they respect, and fear in equal measure. He was fair to those who worked for him, they said, generous even, but there was a coldness underneath the fairness, a sense that he was always calculating, always 3 steps ahead, always aware of every person and every risk within the walls of his house. Elena had heard whispers about what he did outside those walls, business that was not entirely legal, meetings that happened behind closed doors with men who carried themselves like soldiers rather than guests. She did not ask questions. She had learned, in her 3 months working for wealthy families, that questions were rarely welcomed and even more rarely answered honestly. But she could not stop thinking about the way his voice had cracked when he spoke of his mother. That crack had not belonged to a dangerous man. It had belonged to a boy who missed something he could never get back. It was almost a month after the incident when Dante found her again, this time in the garden behind the house, kneeling in the dirt beside an overgrown rose bed with her sleeves pushed up and dirt smudged across her forearms. He had not meant to stop and watch her, had told himself he was simply crossing the lawn on his way to the garage, but something about the sight of her working carefully among the tangled roses made him slow his steps until he was standing only a few feet away. "These roses have not been touched in 6 years," he said. Elena startled, nearly losing her balance where she knelt, and turned to find him standing over her with his hands in his pockets and an expression she could not quite read. "I hope that's all right," she said quickly. "Mrs. Calder mentioned the garden used to be beautiful, and I thought, since I have some free time in the afternoons, I could try to bring some of it back. If you'd rather I leave it alone, I understand completely. Why would you spend your free time on something you're not being paid to do?" She sat back on her heels, considering the question as though it had never occurred to her that the answer needed explaining. Because it seemed like it mattered to someone once, and it felt wrong to let it die completely. "My grandmother used to say a garden is a kind of memory. You plant something, and even after everything else is gone, the plant remembers how to grow the way it was taught." Dante said nothing for a long moment, looking past her at the roses she had been carefully untangling from years of neglect, cutting away the dead wood, clearing the weeds that had strangled the healthy growth beneath. His mother had planted these roses herself, the year before she died, kneeling in this same dirt with the same careful attention Elena now gave them. "My mother planted these," he said finally. "I thought they might have been someone's, the way they were laid out. There's a pattern to it, even under all the overgrowth. Someone who knew what they were doing planted this garden with real care." She looked up at him, shielding her eyes from the afternoon sun. "Was she the one who taught you that song? The one I played without meaning to?" The question hung in the air between them, and Dante felt something in his chest tighten at the directness of it. No one asked him about his mother. No one dared. His men respected the silence around her memory, the way they respected the silence around any grief in a man who did not tolerate weakness in himself or others. But Elena was not one of his men. She was not afraid of him the way they were. Not entirely. And there was something almost freeing in the way she simply asked what she wanted to know, instead of dancing carefully around the subject. "She used to play it every night," he said, surprising himself with how easily the words came. "I would sit under the piano while she played, and she would tell me stories about the notes, how each one was a different memory, a different moment she wanted to keep safe. She told me once that music was the only thing that could not be taken from a person, because it lived somewhere that no one else could reach." "That's a beautiful thing to believe." It was a lie. His voice hardened slightly. "Everything can be taken. She was taken. The song should have gone with her, but somehow you know it, and I do not understand how, and it has kept me awake more nights than I care to admit." Elena rose to her feet slowly, wiping her dirty hands against a cloth tucked into her apron, and studied his face with an openness that most people in his life had long ago learned to avoid. "I've been having strange dreams," she admitted, her voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "Since that night in the music room, I dream about a woman humming, close to me, like she's right beside my ear, but I can never see her face. I wake up and the melody is still there, clear as anything, and I don't know where it comes from. I've never told anyone that. It sounds insane when I say it out loud." "It does not sound insane to me," Dante said. "It sounds like the only thing in this entire situation that makes any sense at all, which is somehow worse. Do you think I'm lying to you? Still, after all this time?" He considered the question honestly, the way he considered every question that mattered. "No," he admitted. "I think you are telling me the truth, and I do not know what to do with a truth I cannot explain." I have spent my whole life dealing in facts, in things I can verify, in threats I can see coming. This is neither of those things. Maybe some things don't need to be explained right away. Maybe they just need time to make sense on their own. She said it gently, and there was something in her tone that reminded him, unwillingly, of his mother's voice, calm and patient, in a way that used to make even his worst days feel smaller. You should not compare yourself to her, he said, more sharply than he intended. I wasn't trying to. I only meant that some things reveal themselves slowly. Elena did not flinch at his sharpness, did not shrink the way most people did when his voice took that edge. Instead, she held his gaze steadily, and Dante found himself, against every instinct he had spent years cultivating, unable to look away first. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the sound of wind moving through the untamed garden, and for a moment neither of them spoke, as though speaking might break whatever fragile thing had settled between them in the dirt and the roses, and the ghost of a song neither of them could fully explain. Finish the garden, Dante said finally, stepping back, putting distance between them the way he always did when he felt something he had not given himself permission to feel. If it matters to you, finish it. I will, Elena said. I promise. He walked away without another word, and Elena watched him go, his broad shoulders tense, even in the relaxed afternoon light, a man carrying weight no garden could ever fully lift. She turned back to the roses and continued her work, but her mind stayed with him, with the crack in his voice, with the grief he wore like armor over something far softer underneath. That night, for the first time since she had started working in the house, Elena dreamed clearly. She stood in a room she had never seen before, sunlight pouring through tall windows, and a woman sat at a piano with her back turned, dark hair falling loose down her shoulders, her hands moving across the keys with the same melody Elena now knew by heart. The woman turned slightly, just enough that Elena caught the edge of her profile, and something in the shape of her cheekbone, the curve of her smile, felt achingly, impossibly familiar. You found your way back, the woman said, though her lips did not seem to move at all, the words simply arriving inside Elena's mind, like a memory surfacing after years buried too deep to reach. I don't understand what's happening to me, Elena whispered in the dream, her voice small and frightened. You will, the woman said, but you must be patient. Some doors take a long time to open, and this one was locked very carefully, for very good reasons. Elena woke with her heart pounding, and the melody still ringing clear in her ears, and for the first time she found herself crying, without fully understanding why, tears sliding silently down her face in the dark of her small room, mourning a woman she had never met, and somehow already missed with a grief that felt entirely her own. She did not know it yet, but 3 floors above her, in a study with an untouched glass of whiskey going warm on the desk, Dante Marchetti sat awake as well, staring at an old photograph of his mother he had not looked at in years, trying to understand why a stranger's face had begun to remind him, in small and unsettling ways, of the woman he had loved and lost, and buried, and never once stopped grieving. The dreams grew stronger with every night that passed, until Elena could no longer pretend they were only dreams. She saw the woman more clearly now, standing in gardens that mirrored the one she tended each afternoon, sitting at the piano that still sat silent in the locked west wing, walking through hallways of the very house Elena now lived and worked in, though the house in her dreams always looked warmer, brighter, filled with a kind of life that had long since drained from its walls. The woman never gave her name. She spoke instead in riddles and half-sentences, always promising that understanding would come, always vanishing the moment Elena reached for more. One night, the woman said something that changed everything. You carry more of me than you know, she whispered, her voice threading through Elena's dream like smoke. Not blood, something older than blood, a promise I made before you were ever born, to a woman who loved my son more than she loved her own safety. Elena woke gasping, the words echoing in her skull, long after the dream dissolved. She lay in the dark for a long while, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of a sentence that felt both impossible and, somehow, true in a way she could not begin to explain. She found Dante the next morning in the study, hunched over papers spread across his desk, dark circles under his eyes that told her he had not slept much better than she had. He looked up when she knocked lightly on the open door, and something in his expression softened just slightly at the sight of her, though he quickly masked it behind the careful control he wore like a second skin. "I need to speak with your aunt," Elena said without preamble. Dante set down his pen slowly. "My aunt has nothing to do with any of this. I think she might. I had another dream last night, and the woman said something about a promise, about someone who loved you more than her own safety. That sounds like it might be about a real person, someone who actually existed, and if anyone in your family would know about that kind of promise, it would be someone old enough to have been there when it was made." He studied her for a long moment, weighing the request against every instinct that told him to keep his family, his history, his vulnerabilities, locked as tightly as that music room had been for 6 years. But he had watched Elena's face for weeks now, had listened to her describe dreams that lined up too precisely with details she could not possibly have known, and some part of him, the part that had stopped sleeping properly since the night he heard that piano, needed answers as badly as she did. "Her name is Camilla," he said finally. "My father's sister. She lives an hour outside the city. She does not leave her home often, and she does not like unannounced visitors, especially ones connected to this family's business. Then we should call ahead." "We," Dante repeated, and something flickered across his face that might have been amusement if the situation had not been so strange and so heavy. "You intend to come with me?" "I think I have to. Whatever this is, it's happening to me. I should be there when we find out what it means." Elena crossed her arms, standing a little straighter, and Dante found himself, not for the first time, struck by how little fear she showed him even now, weeks into understanding exactly what kind of man he was, and exactly what kind of danger surrounded him. "Fine," he said. "We leave within the hour." The drive to Camilla's house took just over an hour, most of it spent in a silence that felt heavier with every mile they covered. Elena watched the city give way to open countryside through the tinted window, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her mind cycling endlessly through fragments of dreams she still could not fully piece together. Beside her, Dante drove with both hands steady on the wheel, his jaw set in a hard line, betraying nothing of the storm she suspected was churning underneath. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said eventually, breaking the silence. "You can ask. I make no promise about an answer." "What was she like? Your mother, before all of this? Before she became something you can't talk about without your voice changing?" Dante was quiet long enough that Elena thought he might not answer at all. "She was gentle," he finally said. "Gentler than she had any right to be, given who she married and what world she found herself living in. My father built this family's business from nothing, and he built it the way men like him always do, with blood and fear and careful violence. My mother never wanted that life. She wanted a quiet house and a garden and a piano, and a son who grew up soft enough to still believe in something beautiful." He paused, his knuckles tightening slightly on the wheel. "I did not stay soft for very long. Because of what happened to her. Because of everything that happened after. She died when I was 22, not gently, the way she deserved, but the way people in this life often do, caught in the crossfire of a war that was never truly hers to fight. I took over the family business 6 months later, and I made certain promises to myself about the kind of man I would become. Soft was not one of the things I allowed myself to keep." Elena watched his profile as he spoke, the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead rather than meet her gaze. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That's not fair. What happened to her? What happened to you?" "Fair has very little to do with the world I live in." But his voice had lost some of its usual hardness, and for a moment, just a moment, Elena thought she saw the boy who used to sit under a piano, listening to his mother hum, still alive somewhere underneath all the armor he had built since. Camilla's house sat at the end of a long gravel drive, a modest stone building surrounded by tall hedges and quiet fields, nothing like the grandeur of Dante's estate. The woman who opened the door was small and sharp-eyed, silver hair pulled back in a tight knot, and she looked at Elena with an intensity that made the younger woman's skin prickle before a single word had been spoken. "Dante," Camilla said, her eyes never leaving Elena's face. "You brought a guest. That is unlike you." "May we come in, Zia? This is important." Camilla stepped back from the door without answering directly, gesturing them into a small sitting room filled with old photographs and heavy furniture that smelled faintly of lavender and dust. She settled into a high-backed chair and folded her hands in her lap, studying Elena the entire time with an expression that shifted, slowly, from suspicion into something closer to shock. "Tell me your name, child," Camilla said. "Elena. Elena Wren." "Wren." Camilla repeated the word softly, as though testing its weight. "That is not the name I would have expected, but perhaps it does not matter. Names change. Faces do not. Not entirely. Not when the blood runs true enough." She turned to Dante, her expression suddenly urgent. "Where did you find her?" "She works in my house. She started 3 months ago." Dante's voice carried an edge of impatience, the tone of a man unaccustomed to being kept waiting for answers. "Zia, please, tell me what you know." "Elena has been having dreams about my mother, and 3 weeks ago, she played a song on my mother's piano, a song that has never been written down, never recorded, that my mother told me was a secret between the two of us. Elena had never heard it before in her life." Camilla closed her eyes briefly, as though gathering strength for something she had hoped never to speak of. When she opened them again, they were wet with unshed tears. "Your mother came to me," she said quietly, "the year before she died. She was frightened, Dante, more frightened than I had ever seen her, though she tried very hard not to show it in front of you. She knew things were becoming dangerous, that the peace your father had built with certain other families was beginning to crack. She told me she was afraid of what might happen to you if something happened to her, and she wanted to leave you something no enemy could ever find or take." "What are you talking about?" "There is an old tradition, older than your father's business, older than this family's involvement in that world at all. A tradition from your mother's own family line, passed down through the women, though it had not been used in generations, and I confess, I did not fully believe in it myself until this very moment, sitting across from a young woman who plays a song she was never taught." Camilla's eyes moved back to Elena, careful and searching. A binding. A piece of memory and love, sealed into someone who has not yet been born. Someone connected by blood, so distant that no enemy could ever trace the thread. Meant to surface only when the one it was intended for needed it most. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "That's not possible." "I did not believe it was possible either. Until tonight." Camilla rose slowly from her chair and crossed to a small writing desk in the corner of the room, pulling out an old yellowed envelope from a locked drawer. "Your mother gave me this before she died, Dante, and told me to keep it safe until the day someone came looking for answers I could not give any other way. She said I would know the moment had come when I saw it in someone's eyes." She handed the envelope to Dante, whose hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single folded letter, the handwriting unmistakably his mother's, elegant and slightly slanted, the same hand that had once written him birthday cards and grocery lists, and small notes tucked into his school lunches. He read it in silence, his jaw tightening with every line, and when he finally looked up, his eyes were red, and his voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. "She knew," he said. "She knew someone might come for her, and she was terrified of what would happen to me if I was left completely alone. She found a distant relative, someone many years removed from our direct line, a young woman who had recently given birth to a daughter. She asked that family to raise their child with a piece of her love hidden inside, passed down not through blood memory exactly, but through something the old traditions call a keeping, a fragment of soul and song meant to protect the person it was tied to when the time was right." Elena's hands were shaking now. "Are you saying I'm connected to your family? That I was raised by strangers who agreed to this? To carrying something inside me I never even knew was there?" "Your grandmother," Camilla said gently, turning to face her fully now. "Was she truly your grandmother, child, or was she someone who took you in, who raised you as her own, though the two of you shared no blood at all?" Elena's breath caught. She had never questioned it, not once in her entire life, but now that the words hung in the air, a flood of small memories rose unbidden to the surface. Her grandmother's careful evasions, whenever Elena asked about her parents, the complete absence of any photographs from before Elena's earliest memories, the way her grandmother used to hum, softly, a melody Elena had never once connected to anything, until 3 weeks ago, In a locked music room, her hands moved on their own and played it back without ever having learned it at all. "She never told me," Elena whispered. "She never once told me the truth." "She was protecting you," Camilla said, "protecting the promise she made to a dying woman who loved her son enough to give away a piece of her own soul, just to make sure he would never be entirely alone in the world." Dante stood frozen, the letter still clutched in his hand, staring at Elena as though seeing her for the first time, truly seeing her, not as a stranger who had wandered into his house and his life by accident, but as something his mother had reached across the boundary of death itself to leave for him. His chest felt tight with a grief so old and so sudden it nearly buckled his knees. "Why?" he managed finally. "Why would she do this? Why not simply hire more guards, build higher walls? Why choose something so strange, so impossible to explain or control?" "Because your mother did not believe walls could protect the parts of you that mattered most," Camilla said softly. "She believed love was the only thing strong enough to survive what she feared was coming. She wanted you to have someone who would understand you the way she did, even after she was gone. She could not know it would take this long, or that fate would bring the two of you together the way it has, but she believed, with everything in her, that it eventually would." Elena looked at Dante, and for the first time since that night in the music room, she saw not the dangerous, controlled man the rest of the world feared, but a son who had spent 6 years grieving a woman who had never truly stopped trying to protect him, even from beyond the grave. "I don't know what any of this means for either of us," Elena said quietly. "I don't know how to carry something like this, or what I'm supposed to do with it now that I know." "Neither do I," Dante admitted, his voice raw. "But I think, for the first time in 6 years, I would like to find out." Outside, the sun had begun to set over Camilla's quiet fields, casting long golden light through the sitting room windows, and somewhere in the walls of the modest stone house, an old clock ticked steadily onward, marking the passage of a truth that had waited 23 years to finally come home. The call came in at midnight, 3 days after the visit to Camilla's house, and Dante knew from the tone of his security chief's voice that something had gone badly wrong. "They found the Eastgate camera disabled 20 minutes ago," Marco said, his words clipped and fast. "2 vehicles on the access road. This has Falcone written all over it, boss. They've been quiet for months, waiting for an opening, and I think tonight they decided to take one." Dante was already moving before Marco finished speaking, pulling on his jacket, checking the weapon he kept locked in his desk drawer, his mind running through every exit, every safe room, every contingency he had built into this house over the years of running a business that made enemies as easily as it made money. The Falcone family had been a thorn in his side since before he took over from his father, old rivals with old grudges, and if they had chosen tonight to make a move, it meant they believed they finally had the advantage. He found Elena in the hallway outside her room, already awake, her face pale in the dim emergency lighting that had activated automatically the moment the security system flagged a breach. She looked at him with wide, frightened eyes, but she did not scream, did not panic the way he might have expected from someone with no experience in this kind of danger. "Tell me what to do," she said instead. "Stay close to me, and do exactly as I say. There is a safe room behind the library, reinforced, with its own exit to the tunnels beneath the house. If anything happens to me, Marco knows to get you there, and out through the east tunnel to the car, waiting on the access road behind the property." "What do you mean, if anything happens to you?" "I mean, I need you to listen, and not argue with me, not tonight." His voice was harder than he intended, but his hand found hers anyway, gripping tightly, an anchor point in the sudden chaos unfolding around them. "This is not a negotiation, Elena. This is exactly the kind of danger I warned you about the first night we met, and I need you safe more than I need anything else in this house." They moved quickly through the darkened halls, past guards taking up positions at windows and doorways, the tension in the house thick enough to choke on. Dante kept Elena tucked close beside him, his body angled protectively between her and every open sightline, years of instinct taking over in a way that left no room for the fear he might have otherwise felt. They had nearly reached the library when the first shots rang out from somewhere near the east gate, distant but unmistakable, and Elena flinched hard against him, her hand tightening painfully around his. "Keep moving," Dante said, low and steady. We are almost there. The safe room door was heavy steel, disguised behind a false bookshelf, and Dante had it open in seconds, pulling Elena inside, just as Marco's voice crackled through the radio clipped to his belt, reporting that 2 men had breached the outer perimeter and were moving toward the main house. Dante's jaw tightened. He handed Elena the radio and pressed a second weapon into her hands, one she stared at with wide, uncertain eyes. I don't know how to use this. You point it and pull the trigger if someone comes through that door who is not me or Marco. That is all you need to know tonight. He looked at her for a long moment, something desperate and unguarded crossing his face before he could stop it. I need to go help hold the line. Marco will get you out through the tunnel if this goes badly. Don't, Elena said suddenly, grabbing his sleeve before he could turn away. Don't go out there like it doesn't matter what happens to you. It matters. I don't fully understand what's happening between us, or what your mother meant this to become, but I know it matters, and I need you to come back. Dante's expression cracked, just slightly, the careful control he wore like armor slipping enough to show the man underneath, frightened not for himself, but for the woman standing in front of him, carrying a piece of his mother's soul inside her. He pulled her close, quickly, fiercely, pressing a kiss to her forehead that lasted only a second, but carried the weight of everything neither of them had yet found the words to say. I will come back, he said. I promise you that. Then he was gone, the steel door sealing behind him, and Elena stood alone in the reinforced room, clutching a weapon she barely understood, listening to the sounds of violence unfolding somewhere above her, praying to a God she had not spoken to in years, that the man she was rapidly, impossibly falling for, would keep the promise he had just made. The fighting lasted only minutes, though it felt to Elena like hours crouched in that small concrete room, the radio crackling with clipped, urgent voices she could barely make sense of. Then, finally, Marco's voice came through clear. It's clear, Miss Wren. Boss wants you brought up to the main house. Everyone is safe. She emerged from the safe room on shaking legs, following Marco through halls that now bore the marks of the brief but violent confrontation, shattered glass near the east entrance, a scorch mark along one wall where something had exploded, guards moving briskly with grim, focused expressions. She found Dante in the main hall, a shallow cut along his temple bleeding sluggishly, but alive, upright, alive in a way that made something in her chest loosen for the first time since the shots first rang out. She crossed the room without thinking and threw her arms around him, and he caught her, holding her tightly against his chest, his heartbeat fast and unsteady beneath her cheek. You kept your promise, she said into his shoulder. I always keep my promises, he murmured, his hand pressed against the back of her head, holding her close, as though he could not quite convince himself she was truly safe, unless he could feel her there against him. It was later that night, after the wounded were tended to, and the perimeter secured, and the surviving intruders questioned by men whose methods Elena did not ask about, that Dante finally told her the rest of what he had learned. Marco pulled information from one of the men we captured, he said, sitting across from her in his study, a bandage now taped neatly over the cut on his temple. The Falcone family did not act alone tonight. They had inside information, details about the house that only someone close to the family should have known. Someone has been feeding them intelligence for months. Do you know who? Not yet, but I intend to find out. His voice had gone cold and hard again, the mask sliding back into place, though Elena noticed his hand did not stray far from hers, resting on the arm of her chair, as though he needed the contact to steady himself as much as she did. I also learned something else tonight, something about why my mother chose the path she did, all those years ago. Elena leaned forward, waiting. She did not simply fear for my safety in the abstract, Dante continued. She had specific knowledge, warnings from someone inside her own family's old connections, that a war was coming, that would outlast her, that would follow me for years after her death. She could not stop it. She could not protect me from every threat that would come my way in this life. So she did the only thing she believed she could do. She made certain that whatever happened, I would never have to face it entirely alone. She gave you me, Elena said softly. She gave me a piece of herself, wrapped inside someone strong enough to survive carrying it. I do not think she could have known exactly how that would look, 23 years later. But I believe, more than I have believed anything in a very long time, that she knew it would matter. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair back from Elena's face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. I have spent 6 years building walls around every soft part of myself, certain that softness was a weakness this life could not afford. And then you walked into a locked room and played a song only my mother knew. And every wall I built began to crack. I'm frightened, Elena admitted. Not of the danger, though I should be. I'm frightened of what it means, that I might have been carrying a piece of someone else this whole time, someone who chose my path before I was even born. You are still entirely yourself, Dante said firmly. Whatever my mother left inside you, it does not erase who you are. It only means that somehow, impossibly, she found a way to reach across time and make certain we would find each other. What you do with that, what we build from here, that belongs entirely to us, not to her. Not to fate, us. Elena studied his face for a long moment, this man who ruled a dangerous world with an iron hand, and yet sat before her now with nothing but honesty and something dangerously close to hope in his eyes. I don't know what comes next, she said. I don't know how any of this is supposed to work, given everything I now know about you, about this house, about the danger that just walked through your front gate tonight. Neither do I, Dante admitted. But I would like to find out, with you, if you are willing. Outside the study window, the night had gone quiet again. The earlier chaos settled into an uneasy calm, and somewhere far below in the West Wing, in a locked room neither of them had visited together since that first fateful night, an old piano sat waiting, holding within its silent keys a melody that had traveled 23 years and crossed the boundary of death itself, just to bring two broken people back to something that finally, impossibly, felt whole. The traitor's name was Vincent, and the discovery of his betrayal broke something in Dante that Elena had not seen before. Not fear, not even anger in its purest form, but a cold, focused resolve that made the entire household move a little quieter around him for the days that followed. Vincent had served the Marchetti family for over a decade, rising through the ranks of household security until he sat at nearly every private meeting, privy to schedules, weaknesses, the layout of every hidden passage and safe room in the estate. Marco found the proof buried in encrypted messages on a phone Vincent had thought carefully hidden. Months of correspondence with a contact inside the Falcone organization, payments traced through accounts that led back to a debt Vincent had never told anyone he was carrying. He sold us out for money, Dante said, the morning after the confession was extracted, his voice flat and controlled in a way that frightened Elena more than shouting ever could. 10 years of loyalty, and in the end, it was worth less to him than a gambling debt. What happens to him now? Elena asked carefully. That is not something you need to carry, Dante said, and something in his tone told her not to push further, that there were parts of his world he still intended to keep separate from her, at least for now, at least until he understood how much of it she could bear to know. She did not argue. She recognized, even this early, that some boundaries existed, not to shut her out, but to protect something in him that had not yet learned how to be gentle with the people he cared about. In the weeks that followed, the household slowly settled back into a rhythm, though it was a different rhythm than before, one built on a new kind of honesty between Dante and Elena that neither of them had expected to find. He began telling her more, in small pieces, about his father, about the early years of taking over the business, about the loneliness of ruling something he had never truly wanted, but felt bound by blood to protect. She told him about her grandmother, the woman she now understood had loved her enough to keep an impossible secret for 17 years, protecting a promise made to a dying stranger out of nothing but loyalty to a cause greater than herself. Do you resent her? Dante asked one evening, the two of them walking slowly through the now flourishing garden, roses blooming in full color for the first time in 6 years, under Elena's careful attention. For not telling you the truth? Elena considered the question seriously before answering. I did, for a little while. I felt like my whole life had been built on something I never agreed to, a piece of me that belonged to someone else's plan before I ever had a say in it. She reached out and brushed her fingers against a deep red rose, careful of the thorns beneath. But then I think about what she gave up to protect that promise. She raised a child that was not hers by blood, loved her the way any mother loves a daughter, and never once let the weight of the secret change how she treated me. That's not resentment I should be carrying. That's gratitude I haven't fully learned how to hold yet. You are far more forgiving than I am, Dante said quietly. Maybe. Or maybe I've just had more practice understanding that people carry secrets for reasons that come from love, even when the secrets themselves feel like a burden. She glanced up at him, a small smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. Your mother certainly understood that better than most. Dante's expression softened at the mention of her, though it no longer carried the same raw grief it once had. In its place had settled something quieter, something closer to peace. I would like to show you something, he said, if you are ready. He led her back into the house, up the familiar staircase, down the long hallway with its cold portraits, until they stood once again outside the door to the music room. Dante hesitated only a moment before pushing it open, sunlight spilling across the dark wood floor, exactly as it had the first night Elena had wandered inside, without knowing what she carried. The piano sat exactly where it always had, and this time, Dante crossed the room and sat down at the bench himself, something he had not done since he was a small boy, sitting beneath these very keys, listening to his mother hum. I have not touched this piano in 6 years, he admitted. I was afraid that if I did, I would lose whatever was left of her in the silence. But I do not think that is true anymore. He looked up at Elena, standing hesitant in the doorway, and held out his hand. Play it with me. Elena crossed the room slowly, and sat beside him on the bench, close enough that their shoulders touched, close enough that she could feel the steady warmth of him beside her. She placed her hands on the keys, and for a moment neither of them moved, letting the weight of the moment settle around them like something sacred. Then, together, they began to play. The melody came easily, the way it always had, Elena's hands moving with the same strange certainty they had carried since that first impossible night. But this time, Dante's hands moved alongside hers, filling in harmonies he had not played in over a decade, notes his mother had once taught him in fragments, before life and grief and the demands of running an empire had stolen the music from his fingers entirely. Together they built something neither of them could have created alone, a song completed at last, 2 broken pieces of a melody finally finding their way back to each other. When the final note faded into silence, Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks, and beside her, Dante's eyes shone bright as well, though he did not look away from her, did not hide the way he once might have. She would have loved you, he said softly, not just for what you carry, but for who you are, your kindness, your stubbornness, the way you refuse to be afraid of me even when every reasonable instinct should have told you to run. I think some part of me knew, even before I understood any of it, that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Elena reached up and wiped at her eyes, laughing softly despite the tears. That sounds impossibly foolish, doesn't it? A girl who grew up cleaning other people's houses, somehow tied by fate to a man who runs half the underworld of this city. It sounds, Dante said, taking her hand and pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles, like exactly the kind of impossible thing my mother would have believed in with her whole heart. Months passed, and the house that had once felt like a mausoleum, cold and silent and full of ghosts no one dared speak of, slowly transformed into something Elena had never expected to find within its walls. Warmth returned to the rooms in small, quiet ways. Fresh flowers on the tables cut from the garden she had brought back to life. Music drifting occasionally from the west wing, where the door now stood permanently unlocked. Laughter that echoed sometimes, through hallways that had known only silence for far too long. Dante still ran his business with the same careful, dangerous precision he always had, still carried the weight of a world Elena did not fully understand, and did not need to, in order to love the man underneath it. But something in him had shifted, softened at the edges in ways his men noticed, even if they never spoke of it aloud, a steadiness in his eyes that had not been there before, the look of a man who had finally stopped merely surviving his grief, and started, instead, to live alongside it. On a quiet evening in early spring, nearly a year after that first impossible night, Dante found Elena in the music room again, sitting alone at the piano, playing the melody softly to herself, her eyes closed, a peaceful smile resting on her face. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, simply watching her, struck once again by how completely his life had changed since the night he walked into this room with a gun in his hand and fury in his heart, only to find something far more valuable waiting for him instead. He crossed the room and knelt beside the bench, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, and Elena's hands stilled on the keys as she opened her eyes and found him there. "My mother gave me this song to keep me from being alone," he said, his voice steady, despite the way his hands trembled slightly around the small box. "I do not think, even in her wildest hopes, she imagined it would lead me here, to you, to a love I never believed I deserved to find in a life built on so much darkness. But it did. You did." He opened the box, revealing a simple ring that had belonged, Elena would later learn, to his mother herself, kept safe all these years in a drawer he had not been able to open until now. "I do not know how to promise you an easy life, Elena. I can only promise you a whole one, every part of me, the good and the difficult, for as long as you will have it." Elena looked at him, at the man who had once frightened her with a gun in his hand, and now knelt before her with nothing but open, unguarded love in his eyes, and she felt the same warm certainty she had felt the very first night she sat at this piano, a feeling that had carried her, impossibly, improbably, exactly to this moment. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy she made no effort to hide. "Yes, of course, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and when he kissed her, the last golden light of the setting sun spilled through the tall windows of the music room, catching the piano keys in a soft amber glow, as though somewhere, in whatever place love and memory go when a life ends, a woman who had given away a piece of her own soul, so her son would never be alone again, was finally, after all these years, allowed to rest. The piano sat silent between them, its work at last complete, but the melody it had carried across 23 years, and through the boundary of death itself, remained, woven now into the life of two people who had found, against every impossible odd, exactly what they were always meant to find in each other.